All right. Hi there, everyone. Welcome back to our next module of critical thinking. At this point of the course, I think you might be feeling a little overwhelmed. We discussed arguments and premises, as well as claims and propositions. And then we turned and we complicated those claims, propositions, premises, and arguments. I think when we're learning about all those different types of claims and propositions, premises, and arguments, it can get really overwhelming because although I might tell you why it's important or relevant to know some of those things, that might not always be very obvious, and it's a lot of information at once, especially if you're taking this course in a compressed manner so that you are receiving all that information at once. I understand and recognize that can be a lot. My hope and my desire is that students who struggle or who are overwhelmed with that part of the course do much better with argument mapping, which is the topic of this week. It seems to me that students who really appreciate and do well with that kind of information that we covered before, the sort of like flow chart and understanding what kind of arguments we have. Some students who do really well with that sort of stuff find argument mapping to be a unnecessary or difficult skill to learn. And at that same time, a lot of students who are really overwhelmed or who are frustrated by having to classify all of these premises, claims, propositions, and arguments, actually find that argument mapping is a skill and a technique that is really helpful for them. Between these 2 weeks, you feel much more confident thinking about how arguments and claims are working, how you can how you can discern them, and then how you respond to them. But also, I think this is kind of more fun. The assignment this week is more fun, in my opinion, and it's also just much shorter. These lectures are much shorter, and you get to still learn. It's not like you're not getting any information this week, but a lot of the information you already know at this point, and it's also just sort of less overwhelming, I think, than the lectures preceding. If you're struggling or if parts of the course do not always seem very clear to you, you are not alone. I am a resource for you, and also that is a understandable response, right? I just made you learn all the different types of claims and propositions: simple, complex, inferential, factual, as well as hidden premises. And then you had to learn what sound, unsound, valid, invalid, strong, weak, cogent, and uncogent arguments all were. A lot of vocab coming at you at once, and it's not that you just have to know that vocab, but you also have to know what it is, why it's important. You have to understand it in a literal sense as well as a pragmatic sense of how to engage with it. And I'm hoping this week is another resource for you to get that clarified, and then also to find new ways to think about arguments. This week we are talking about argument mapping. Argument mapping is, I want to say, almost a fun way to interact with arguments. I personally am not often using argument mapping because I have learned that sort of standard way of looking at arguments now I was introduced to that in high school. So I would have been looking at arguments that way now for 7 or 8 years. Argument mapping is actually something I only ever came to know because some of my peers preferred to use this method, especially some of my peers whose training in ethics or philosophy is from outside of having bachelor's or master's degrees in philosophy and ethics. That's not to dog on this style at all. It's just to say that I think some people's brains really, really do take this sort of way of looking at arguments, and it's incredibly helpful for them in a way that for some of us, it's not. Other thing I'm going to say about argument mapping is when I do use it, is if you have a really complex argument, and I'll say, some of you chose huge, really complex arguments, right? If you have a huge argument that has a lot going on and you have to think about how all of these things are working together, sometimes just putting it out on a map like this is actually an incredible idea. I do that. And my thesis advisor actually recommended when I was looking over my thesis to do this with my argument to see what was going on. And it actually teaches you a lot about things you're doing or ways ideas are interacting that might not have always been exactly clear or familiar to you. Okay, so let's do it. Let's stop talking about it. Let's do it. Remember what I said last week when I talked to you about inference? We talked about inferential claims. We talked about induction as an argument style. I said, look, there are things you know, and then you make an educated guess, right? I also sort of said you're creating a story, you're creating some answer to finish your story. Then I also mentioned, for the purposes of this class, but also as a general rule, to know if something was inferential as opposed to factual, inferential claims or your inferences are built upon some other fact in the argument. Why is that important to know? Sometimes parts of your argument rely on other parts of the argument as an inferential style. We also talked about complex claims. Complex claims are these types of claims with that internal logic structure. So some part of the argument relies on another part of the argument. So we're still thinking about course concepts from last week, knowing what inferential claims were, knowing what complex claims were. That's still relevant here. So let me take a sentence. Let's take an argument. We should lower the speed limit. I think it's so funny that I keep coming back to speed limits. We should lower the speed limit because it would cause less car accidents. My E isn't very pretty here. We should lower the speed limit. Why? Because it would cause less car accidents. This is a complex claim. It is kind of the opposite of the complex claims we looked at last week. But notice it is still a complex claim. Last week, all of the complex claims we looked at, it was using if or but. Internal logic structure almost always followed, right? If we did this, blank would happen. And that was the clear internal logic structure. I'm trying to demonstrate also that that can be flipped, right? So blank because blank. That's still just so it's clear, an internal logic structure, which means this is a complex claim, right? So there's two things here. The first is that we should lower the speed limit, and the second is the reason why we should lower the speed limit, which is it would cause less car accidents. Let's just number those. So we have number one and we have number two. Number one relies on number two. We should lower the speed limit. Why should we lower the speed limit? Because it would cause less car accidents. Number one depends on number two. How are we going to demonstrate that in an argument map? Actually, really easy. We have number one here in a circle, number two here in a circle. We know that number one depends on number two. We know that number one depends on number two. That's our argument map. We have two claims here, right? The first claim was we should lower the speed limit. The other claim was it would cause less car accidents. So those claims, just like we identify premises in all of the lectures before, we isolate and then we number them. This claim was given the number one. This claim was given number two. Now I want to know how they interact with each other. Number two, it would cause us car accidents, implied that we should lower the speed limit. That's what this arrow means. Implies that. Or sometimes people will say therefore. A lowered speed limit would cause less car accidents, therefore we should lower the speed limit. Or a lowered speed limit causing less car accidents implies that we should lower the speed limit. That's what this arrow here in the middle is doing. I'll make it a different color, right? There's an arrow there, and that arrow says implies that or therefore. This is called an inferential link. Remember what inference is, right? This belief here, is it true? Why? Because it's something else I knew. This belief here that we should lower the speed limit, is it true? Well, why? Because it would lower car accidents. You could even think about this arrow here being the connector that says, is number one true? Well, why? Because of number two. So the flow of logic has to come from number one to number two. Now, that was an inferential link. Inferential link. That's what an arrow is. There's also going to be independent as opposed to conjoint support. That argument I just showed you, where two meant one, had only one line of logic happening, right? There was only one sort of logical flow happening in my argument. It looked like this. 2, therefore 1. Super Super clear. Sometimes, though, there's a lot of things going on that mean one thing. So let's return to this argument. Premise 1, lower speed limit causes less car accidents. Premise 2, we should try to lower car accidents. Conclusion, we should lower the speed limit. If you had this kind of argument, how would you make a map out of it? The first thing you would do is you would give everyone numbers. So this is number 1, this is number 2, this is number 3. And I'll just circle them. This is the final ultimate conclusion, right? This is the thing that all of the logic flow will come to. Just as number 1 was the therefore, the implied that, the reason that number 2 is relevant, just as that flowed that direction, number 1 is the ultimate conclusion of our brand new argument we have here. So I'm going to write number 3 at the very bottom. Clearly, it seems to me that this is the reason my argument is relevant. That is the opinion and belief I hold. That's a great question to ask. Here's my argument. What is it that I believe? Why do I believe it? These two things. Independent versus conjoint support tells me about the way these reasons I believe my argument are behaving. Do they both have to be true together in order for 3 to be true? Or are they both independently just adding reasons to believe number 3? Does lower speed limits causing less car accidents mean by itself we should lower the speed limit? No. Remember, this is like a math problem. If you had to find the hidden premise, and premise 2 wasn't there, and I asked you for the hidden premise, so it only said a lower speed limit will cause less car accidents, so we should lower the speed limit, I would ask you, what's the hidden premise? You would say, we should try to lower car accidents. So this alone doesn't mean this. In order to get from this to this, I have to have that we should try to lower car accidents. So logically, these things work together. They both need to be part of the argument to get to this point. What does that mean? They're conjoint. How do you write that on a map? With this sort of bracket shape. This bracket shape means you need both in order to get to here. Most arguments we've looked like have been like this, because ultimately, all of the reasons you believe something really should be working together to get to your conclusion. Arrow means inferential link, implies that, therefore. Bracket means conjoint. Conjoint means like attached together. If you know what the word conjoint twins means, those are like twins who are literally their bodies are infused with one another and they can't separate themselves. Conjoint. These things are in relationship with each other. Two people in a faithful marriage are conjoint. That marital relationship has brought them together. That sort of relationship is different than this kind of argument. Watch this kind of argument. Sarah got an A on the quiz. As to Kendall got an A on the quiz. Therefore, the quiz is probably easy. No offense to Sarah and Kendall. This is an inferential argument, right? I say that because this sort of argument we see in deductive arguments because they actually necessarily mean this point, and all of the reasons will have to work together. Remember, sometimes arguments, and most of our arguments, don't actually come together perfectly to mean our conclusions. We just have a lot of reasons to believe something, and then we infer something about the world to get to our opinion. Why I mention that, though, is because that means sometimes your reasons can be independent of one another. Kendall getting an A on the quiz doesn't mean anything about Sarah getting an A on the quiz, and vice versa. Just because Sarah got an A doesn't mean Kendall will, and just because Kendall did doesn't mean Sarah will. Those two reasons, we'll write 1, 2, 3. Those two reasons have their own inferential link to my conclusion. They are both giving me reasons to believe my conclusion independent of one another. Sarah getting an A on the quiz does not mean Kendall will get an A, and Kendall getting an A doesn't mean Sarah will. But they both are reasons for me. They're both premises that I personally believe the quiz is probably easy. So they are still implying my conclusion. They're implying my third point. Because remember, you won't write conclusion or a C with maps. These are still implying that. Let's look at an example from the book, which is super complicated, but I think incredible. Okay. This is not the whole argument, but this is as much room as I had. So that's what we're going to work with, okay? Like I said, I think this is actually a great argument because this sounds like something you'd hear someone say to give you their opinion. This is like what arguments are like in the real world and what people like me do when we have to do philosophy and analyze arguments. All right, so let's just start by reading it. The president may have her faults. Remember, this is not our current president. This is just something that was written for us to read. The president may have her faults, but she's an outstanding leader and we should re-elect her. Her foreign policy has brought about respite from violence in various war-torn regions as she sent troops to protect refugees in Rwanda and she negotiated an armistice between Egypt and Israel. Her economic policy has also been largely successful and that a potential recession has been avoided for now. She is also a great moral leader, as hers is a model family, and then it continues from there. But this is what I'm going to map for you here right now. Remember, what was the first thing that we did? Took all of the claims, we identified them, and then we numbered them. The president may have her faults. That's a claim. What was a claim? A claim was any statement that is falsifiable. That's a statement. The president has faults. It is falsifiable. It is either true that the president may have her faults or it is false. Okay? So the president may have her faults. That's claim one. But she is an outstanding leader and we should re-elect her. That's two claims right there. She is an outstanding leader is one claim, and we should re-elect her is another claim. For this argument, if you would have made this one single claim and said it was a complex claim, I actually wouldn't have taken any points away. Because you can argue she's an outstanding leader and we should re-elect her is a complex claim, and that we should re-elect her is just dependent on the fact that she's an outstanding leader. That's where these maps get a little subjective. But as long as the way you are mapping it makes sense and is an actual legitimate way, someone who is familiar with how claims can be complex is actually relevant to you, clearly know what these brackets and these arrows and all these things mean, then I'm not going to be taking off points because you add complex claims to save yourself numbers. That makes total sense to me, okay? Foreign policy has brought about respite from violence in various war-torn regions as she sent troops to protect refugees in Rwanda and she negotiated an armistice between Egypt and Israel. Okay. I see three claims here. First is her foreign policy has brought about respite from violence in various war-torn regions. Foreign policy has brought about respite from violence in various war-torn regions. There's a lot of fluff going on here. That her foreign policy has brought about respite from violence is really the claim. In various war-torn regions is just describing where she's brought this respite from. Respite meaning like freedom or cessation of like struggle. Respite to like give a break. So her foreign policy has brought a break from violence in various war-torn regions. So like, once again, this is somewhat subjective. If you just put the bracket here, that's fine. But in various war-torn regions, that's a prepositional phrase, which is a very fancy English term that you might have learned in like grammar school or in like English class. That's to say it doesn't actually itself give you a new subject. It's just describing another subject in the clause. If that doesn't make sense to you, ask a question like this. Is it a claim? Is it true or false that in various war-torn regions No. You can't say, is it true in various war-torn regions? In various war-torn regions, what? There's no actual thing that can be true or false. That's different than asking, is it true that her foreign policy has brought about respite? That actually makes sense. That's a question I can ask. That actually seems like a thing someone could ask me. That's why when I was teaching the word falsifiable, I said I like the question, is it true? If you can put, is it true her foreign policy has brought about respite from violence, you have yourself a falsifiable statement. In the way that you can't write, is it true in various war-torn regions? Because that wasn't a statement, that was falsifiable, right? If that distinction doesn't seem clear, I understand, but that is a distinct thing, okay? As she sent troops to protect refugees in Rwanda. That's another thing. Is it true she sent troops to protect refugees in Rwanda? It works. That's its own claim right there. Adding, is it true? And then, is it true? ... That is another way to isolate if you have a claim here. And she negotiated an armistice between these two countries. Is it true she negotiated an armistice? Yes. Okay. Her economic policy has been largely successful in that a potential recession has been avoided for now. There are two claims in that sentence. Her economic policy has also been largely successful. Is it true her economic policy has also been largely successful in that a potential recession has been avoided for now? And that is kind of a fancy philosophy way of saying because, or we know it is so because. So I also, because I study philosophy, had a hint there within that. But is it true a potential recession has been avoided for now? See why I taught you that question? Sometimes I have reasons for things. Finally, she's also a great moral leader, as hers is a model family. And then that paragraph in the book continues on. But that's all we'll do for this exercise. She is a great moral leader is one idea, and hers is a model family. Hers, if you've never heard it used that way, is basically shortening as her family as the model family. Hers is a way of saying the thing that belongs to her. Hers. Okay. What was the next thing I said we do? I said we number all of these things. 10 claims is enough to make a super complicated map. So this is an argument. The president may have her faults, but she is an outstanding leader and we should re-elect her. Her foreign policy has brought about respite from violence in various war-torn regions as she's in blah, 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 blah. What is the thing this person believes? She's an outstanding leader and we should re-elect her. All of this are just the reasons why she's an outstanding leader and we should re-elect her, right? The president may have her faults is not the reason that they believe something. The president having her faults is not a reason they believe it. That's actually a point of charity, right? This is something we do all the time. We admit there might be something that I am not including here. It's a way of admitting your bias, but is then when the argument starts. She's not sitting leader in Bishop Lecture. That's why I didn't have to write the whole paragraph, right? I knew all that was going to happen were just more and more reasons. These are reasons why they believe this. Do you remember what we call that? The argument. The argument is the thing that is believed. The premises are the reason they believe them. So this is going to be at the end of my map. 2 and 3. Remember I said if you ended up putting these together, that's fine. Part of how I knew that was fine is because I could tell going into this that these things were going to become one conclusion either way. So if you made it one complex claim, okay. All the logical support, all that independent and conjoint support has to conclude into my argument. That is the direction my argument will flow. Let's continue. So she's an outstanding leader and we should re-elect her. Her foreign policy has brought about respite from violence in various war-torn regions as she sent troops to protect refugees in Rwanda, and she negotiated an armistice between Egypt and Israel. Okay, so what is the point of this sentence? If you had to think critically and go, they mentioned the sentence, her foreign policy has been brought about respite, blah, blah, blah. Why are they talking about refugees in an armistice? The refugees in an armistice are two premises. There are two reasons someone believes something. But why are they talking about them? They're talking about them because they believe her foreign policy has brought about respite from violence in various war-torn regions. Her foreign policy has brought about respite from violence in various war-torn regions. This clearly is a reason that 2 and 3 are believed, right? This clearly is the reason 2 and 3 are believed. Why do they believe that her foreign policy has brought about respite from violence in various war-torn regions? Because she sent troops. Because she got that armistice. Okay? Her foreign policy has brought about respite from violence in various wars. How do they prove that that policy has brought respite? What is the proof? Does it depend on anything else in the argument? Yes, it does. What does it depend on? Sending troops to protect refugees, and it depends on the armistice. Notice this isn't conjoint, though. Does sending troops to protect refugees mean that she negotiated an armistice? No. And we know it for sure because she mentions these 3 different places that are separate. And so therefore those events are independent of one another. That line is independent. But they both are independently demonstrating a reason to believe number 4, which is her foreign policy has brought about respite, which is itself a reason that we believe that she's an outstanding leader and we should re-elect her. Our economic policy has also been largely successful in that a potential recession has been avoided for now. That's the exact same type of thing, 8 and 7, right? Yes. That is the exact same type of thing, except now we only have one line, like that first argument I ever showed you. 9 and 10 is similar here. She is also a great moral leader, as hers is a model family. Now, here's the interesting thing. I already mentioned that, for example, her foreign policy has brought about respite from violence in various war-torn regions is a reason that she's an outstanding leader and we should re-elect her as believed. But notice that these 3 claims, that her foreign policy has brought about respite, that her economic policy has been successful, and that she's a great moral leader, are all working together to prove these 2 things. So they are conjoint. Yeah. Confirmed, I know what I'm doing. But these are conjoint. We don't believe she's an outstanding leader only because her foreign policy has brought about respite. If that was all we believed, then the claim would be she has brought about respite and we should re-elect her. But the idea is she's an outstanding leader. And this person is saying, what makes an outstanding leader? An outstanding leader is someone whose foreign policy brings respite, whose economic policy avoids recession, and who is a great moral leader. That is an outstanding leader. All of that together proves an outstanding leader. Alternatively, all of that proves someone who should be re-elected. Okay? Final thing about argument mapping that I'll just add to this argument is we talked about hidden premises. To write a hidden premise, you would write a number like this, and then you dot around in a circle. So let's say that I said, I want you to make your map more complicated and add a hidden premise. So you put an 11 here. And now all of this together. What is a potential hidden premise? Outstanding and leaders worth re-electing. And I'll just write 4, 7, and 10 here to save myself a marker. But outstanding leaders and leaders worth re-electing are leaders whose foreign policy brings respite, whose economic policies prevent recession, and who are great moral leaders. That's a hidden premise I could put there. And the way I would demonstrate that is by then making this a dotted line. I'm not asking you in this course to find and create hidden premises with argument maps this week, because I think already this part of thinking about the arrows and the brackets is complicated enough. That's what I want you to focus on. I did include this though, because if you're looking at your argument and you're saying, I don't think yet that I can get here until I say something else, that's what I want you to do. So if you don't think an argument has successfully proved its point, so to say, great observation. Make a hidden premise so that you can finish your map. I don't want you to not be able to create your map because someone didn't mention, at times maybe, like that euthanasia example, you might disagree with them and say, well, they didn't include that really important premise that killing someone is always unethical, referring to our argument from last week. When I introduced hidden premises and I showed you that example, you might say, I can't map that argument until I add this hidden premise because this argument didn't actually infer that or create a therefore successfully. So if you find yourself with an argument like that, that's what you'll do, okay? If you are creating an argument map and you think it works just fine, you don't need the hidden premise for your brain to make sense of the argument. That's also great. You don't have to put a hidden premise. Know that that is how you would put a hidden premise on a map, though. I hope this all makes sense. For your assignment this week, where I'm having you take a song and do an argument map, there is a separate video where I do the same activity. So even if you've already done the discussion board post, it might be helpful for you to return to that video just to watch me do another example, okay?